Rachel Dunley said she found her boyfriend Marcus Hale lying in a pool of blood, but the evidence told a far darker story. From the moment she made the 911 call, something felt off. No signs of forced entry, no tears, no real urgency. As detectives dug deeper, Rachel's calm began to crack, revealing a chilling truth. Marcus hadn't been attacked by a stranger. He had been silenced by someone he trusted the most. This is the full story of a manipulative girlfriend, a failed cover-up, and the interrogation that made her realize she's not going home. Rachel Dunley's 911 call came in just after 6:45 p.m. on a freezing Friday night in February. Her voice was frantic, barely holding together as she told the dispatcher that her boyfriend, Marcus Hale, had been attacked. She said she had just returned to their small apartment in Dalton Springs to find him on the floor, unresponsive, bleeding from the head. Her story, rushed and panicked, was that someone had broken in while she was out for coffee. Within minutes, emergency services were en route. Paramedics arrived at the apartment to find Marcus already dead. He was lying on his back near the edge of the living room carpet, a dark pool of blood soaked into the fabric beneath his head. The scene was eerily quiet. There were no signs of forced entry. The apartment door had been unlocked but not damaged. Nothing appeared to be missing or out of place. The television was still on, a game show flashing silently on the screen. A half-drunk bottle of soda sat on the coffee table. Marcus's phone was on the kitchen counter, unlocked and idle. It looked like he'd just been living his life until it suddenly ended. Rachel stood near the front door, wearing a hoodie with dark smears down the sleeves and the front. Her jeans were stained as well. Her hands trembled, but not as much as officers expected. She repeated that she had just walked in and found Marcus like this. She couldn't explain the blood on her clothes, said maybe she had gotten too close when she tried to shake him awake. When asked if she had touched anything or moved anything, she hesitated before answering. Officers noted the lack of visible emotion beyond panic. There were no tears, no shock, just a kind of tension, like someone bracing for something. They didn't confront her with their suspicions right away. Instead, they gently asked her to come to the station for a few more questions. She agreed quickly, as if eager to cooperate. She kept saying she just wanted to go home and figure out what had happened. At the police station, Rachel waited in a small interview room while investigators processed the crime scene. The responding officers had already begun comparing notes, and doubts were forming. Something about the situation didn't feel right. The injuries Marcus sustained were brutal, more consistent with an attack by someone up close, someone angry. A heavy lamp had been knocked off the bedroom dresser and found under the bed, cracked and covered in blood. That wasn't consistent with a break-in. It was consistent with a crime of passion. The first major inconsistency was time. According to Rachel, she had left the apartment around 6 p.m. to grab coffee at a nearby cafe. She said she had walked back around 6:40 p.m. and found Marcus. But surveillance footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed Rachel leaving the apartment at 6:12 p.m., not looking panicked but calm. She wasn't carrying her phone. She was holding a white plastic bag. She returned just before 6:30 p.m. empty-handed and walking at a normal pace. She paused at the door before entering. There was no urgency, no panic, no signs of discovering a bloody scene. Inside the apartment, forensic investigators worked quietly. They found Marcus's blood not only near the body but in the hallway, leading to the bedroom. Blood spatter was located on the edge of the dresser, on the wall just above the bed frame, and faintly on the inside of the closet door. The living room, where Rachel claimed she found him, had far less evidence of violence. The pattern suggested he was attacked in the bedroom, and either moved or stumbled into the living room before collapsing. Then there were the clothes. The hoodie Rachel wore was collected as evidence. Luminol tests later showed high-velocity blood spatter on the chest and sleeves, indicative of being present during the moment of impact. It didn't match someone kneeling over a body afterward. It matched someone delivering the blow. Still, Rachel remained calm during initial questioning. She didn't ask about Marcus. She didn't demand to know what had happened. She didn't cry. Officers made careful notes, choosing not to press her hard in the early stages. They needed more. They needed something definitive. Rachel thought she was just checking a box, answering a few questions, and heading back home. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that her story was already unraveling. The apartment had told a different version of events, one that pointed directly at her. The apartment Rachel and Marcus shared was small, just a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of an older brick building on the edge of Dalton Springs. Neighbors described them as quiet, mostly keeping to themselves. From the outside, it didn't look like the kind of place where something violent would happen. But inside, the story was shifting quickly. By the next morning, the crime scene unit had completed their full sweep. What they found contradicted nearly every part of Rachel's version of events. The supposed break-in had no signs to back it up. There was no damage to the door, no tampering with the lock, no windows open or broken. Police canvassed the building, checking with other tenants, and found no reports of suspicious activity, strange visitors, or unfamiliar cars. No one had seen anyone enter or leave the apartment around the time Marcus died, except Rachel. She had told them she went to the coffee shop down the street. Investigators pulled security footage from the shop. Rachel never showed up, not at any time that day. The receipt she had shown as proof of her trip was time-stamped 2 days earlier. That lie was the first solid crack in her story. More troubling was what investigators found inside the apartment's bathroom trash. Tucked deep inside the wastebasket were several damp tissues streaked with blood, along with a pair of latex gloves. There was also a used wipe that had been sprayed with a cleaning solution. These weren't signs of someone discovering a body. They were signs of someone cleaning up after violence. The layout of the apartment was simple: a short hallway from the front door, a bathroom on the right, the bedroom straight ahead, and the living room to the left. In the bedroom, the sheets were half pulled off the bed, and a corner of the mattress was stained with blood. On the dresser, a broken photo frame lay face down. The most significant piece of evidence was the shattered lamp, which had been stashed beneath the bed. It matched the injuries on Marcus's head, both in shape and weight. Blood was visible on the base, along with hair and tissue. Analysis of Marcus's phone gave further insight. His last activity was a text to a friend at 6:08 p.m., joking about dinner plans. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Police could confirm he had been alive and well just minutes before Rachel was caught on camera leaving the apartment. That narrowed the window significantly. Detectives also examined Rachel's phone. Initially, she said she had left it at home while going out, but digital forensics showed she had been using it throughout the day. Several messages had been deleted shortly before the 911 call. Technicians recovered fragments from the device. One deleted text to Marcus, time-stamped at 5:55 p.m., read, "You'll regret walking away from me. I swear you will." They also found internet searches that raised red flags. The night before Marcus's death, Rachel had looked up phrases like, "How to clean blood off walls," and "Can police tell who hit someone first?" It was enough to establish intent, or at least preparation. Investigators were now convinced the scene had been staged. The blood spatter analysis painted a picture of the attack. It started in the bedroom, likely after an argument. Marcus may have been sitting on the bed when Rachel struck him with the lamp. The first blow wasn't fatal, but it was disorienting. He stumbled toward the door, leaving smears on the hallway wall. A second strike occurred near the living room, where he collapsed. That was where Rachel called the police after trying to clean part of the mess and change her clothes. They recovered her sneakers from the bedroom closet. Under UV light, they showed blood droplets and smears on the soles and laces. She hadn't changed them before calling 911. Her socks, found in the bathroom hamper, were damp and stained, likely from stepping in the blood before realizing it. Everything was stacking up against Rachel. But what made the case even more chilling wasn't just the crime. It was her calmness afterward. She had spoken to officers with confidence. She hadn't cried during questioning. She told the same story without flinching. It was the kind of composure that made detectives uncomfortable, not because it was grief held in, but because it didn't feel like grief at all. By the end of that second day, investigators had what they needed to take the next step. Rachel wasn't officially under arrest yet, but she was no longer just a witness. They called her in again, this time not to gather more details but to confront her with what they had. She walked into the station expecting another short conversation. She didn't know the case against her was nearly complete. Rachel Dunley sat in the interview room under soft fluorescent lighting, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. The walls were blank, the air still. She glanced occasionally at the clock but said little. Investigators had told her they just needed to clarify a few things. She had come willingly, even casually, asking if they'd be done in time for her to pick up a few things from her apartment. She didn't seem to realize the tone had changed. Outside the room, detectives were reviewing her digital footprint and diving deeper into her past. What they found added another layer to the story, one that exposed a disturbing pattern. Rachel wasn't just a scorned girlfriend acting in a moment of rage. She had a documented history of jealousy, controlling behavior, and emotional instability. Ex-boyfriends came forward, describing similar experiences, sudden mood swings, constant accusations of cheating, and unpredictable anger. One man even claimed Rachel had once slashed his tires after an argument. Another said she faked an illness to keep him from breaking up with her. None of them had pressed charges, but the pattern was consistent. She didn't handle rejection well. In the months leading up to Marcus's death, friends noticed he had started pulling away from her. He canceled social plans more frequently and stopped posting about Rachel on social media. A few close friends later told police that Marcus had talked about ending the relationship. He felt trapped. He said Rachel would get hysterical when he brought up the idea of moving out. One friend described a message Marcus had sent just a week before he was killed. It read, "She's not going to let me go easily. I'm worried she might do something crazy." At the time, it seemed like the kind of thing people say during a rough breakup. In hindsight, it sounded like a warning. Police subpoenaed Rachel's full text history. They recovered over 100 messages between her and Marcus in the 2 weeks before his death. Many were filled with accusations. Others begged him to stay. Then there were threats, subtle emotional manipulations designed to make Marcus feel guilty. Phrases like, "If you walk away, don't expect things to end peacefully," and "You think you can just leave like it means nothing," were common. Rachel's internet activity revealed even more troubling details. She had searched for information on head trauma, bleeding patterns, and how long it takes for police to trace deleted texts. These weren't generic or innocent searches. They were precise, purposeful. One search, done just 2 days before the murder, simply said, "What happens if someone dies in your apartment?" Investigators concluded that Rachel had not only considered harming Marcus, but had begun preparing for what would happen after. She had purchased cleaning supplies and gloves the week before. A receipt from a nearby hardware store showed a bottle of heavy-duty disinfectant, a roll of plastic sheeting, and latex gloves. Neighbors added their own pieces to the puzzle. The couple living below Marcus and Rachel reported hearing arguing almost every night that week. The night Marcus died, they said the noise was louder than usual, followed by a heavy thump, and then silence. No one ever heard anyone else enter or leave the apartment. Back in the interview room, Rachel stuck to her original story. She had left the apartment, She had come home and found Marcus. She didn't know how it happened, but the investigators weren't there to hear her version anymore. They were there to see how she reacted when it was taken apart in front of her. They showed her the footage from the neighbor's camera. They asked her to explain the bag in her hand. She looked confused. Then they showed her the timestamp. She said it was from a different day. Then they played the second clip, her returning with nothing. Her expression shifted. Next came the text messages. Deleted, recovered, displayed on the screen in front of her. Rachel blinked rapidly but said nothing. They mentioned the blood found on her shoes, the gloves in the trash, the lamp under the bed. With each piece of evidence, the room felt smaller. Rachel leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms again. She asked if this was still just a conversation. The detective didn't answer. The silence hung heavy. Outside, the arrest paperwork was already being prepared. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. Rachel had planned, attacked, cleaned, and lied. What she didn't know yet was that her future had already changed. She wasn't going home. She was heading straight into custody. Rachel Dunley sat still in the cold metal chair of the interview room, her posture stiffer than before. Her eyes darted between the two detectives who had now stopped asking open-ended questions and were instead laying down pieces of the case like trapdoors. One by one, they showed her everything. The footage of her leaving the apartment when she claimed she was out getting coffee. The receipts showing she had bought gloves and cleaning supplies days before the murder. The broken lamp with Marcus's blood and hair on it. The gloves in the bathroom trash. Her deleted internet searches. The recovered texts. The evidence was not only damning, it was airtight. She knew it. And they knew she knew. Rachel's responses became shorter, her tone flatter. She stopped asking questions. She no longer asked when she could leave. She looked down a lot, no longer trying to explain away the inconsistencies. She said she didn't remember sending those messages. She said she must have thrown the tissues away after trying to stop the bleeding. She insisted she never touched the lamp, never searched for anything online, never cleaned up any part of the apartment. But her voice lacked conviction, and she no longer seemed to believe her own words. By that point, the lead detective had already sent a quiet signal to the officers waiting outside the room. The paperwork was in motion. Rachel Dunley was about to be placed under arrest for the murder of Marcus Hale. In another room, Marcus's family waited. They had driven down the night before after hearing the news. His mother hadn't spoken much, but his sister asked questions, sharp, angry ones. She said she always knew something was off with Rachel. She said Marcus had tried to leave her 3 times and each time she found a way to pull him back in. His friends had shared the same concerns. The detectives were careful. They weren't just building a case, they were protecting it. Every move had been logged, every item photographed, every timeline double-checked. There were no missing pieces. When Rachel asked to use the restroom, a female officer accompanied her. When she was offered a drink, it was recorded. They wanted no loopholes, no room for claims of coercion or mistreatment. The moment finally came when one of the detectives leaned forward and said her name, followed by the words she hadn't expected to hear. She was not going home. She was being charged with second-degree murder. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't protest. She simply leaned back, exhaled slowly, and stared at the wall. It was as if she had always known it would come to this, and had been playing a role she could no longer maintain. As officers entered to take her into custody, she stood calmly and held out her wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut. She walked out of the room without looking back. Word of the arrest spread quickly through Dalton Springs. Local news picked up the story that evening. A promising young man beaten to death in his own home. A girlfriend who claimed to be a witness, now arrested as the killer. Reporters camped outside the police station. True crime forums online began speculating about the motive. Some thought it was jealousy. Others said it was fear of abandonment. A few believed it was all premeditated, based on Rachel's disturbing search history. Investigators, meanwhile, were finalizing their case file. The physical evidence was more than enough. But the digital trail Rachel had left behind gave prosecutors the narrative they needed. Text messages, deleted searches, purchases, and timeline inconsistencies all pointed to planning and intent. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. This was a calculated decision, followed by an attempt to stage a crime scene. Rachel spent her first night in jail in silence. No visitors, no calls. She didn't request a lawyer until the following morning. Her mugshot showed none of the panic from the 911 call. No tears, no confusion. Just a blank expression. She had entered that interrogation room thinking she could outtalk the truth, that she could explain away what happened, that the detectives would let her go. But the evidence had spoken louder than any words. She wasn't going home. She was going to trial. The courtroom was quiet as Rachel Dunley entered in an orange jumpsuit, her wrists shackled, her expression unreadable. It had been nearly 9 months since Marcus Hale's death, and the trial was about to begin. The gallery was filled with a mix of reporters, curious locals, and Marcus's grieving family. His mother sat in the front row, clutching a framed photo of her son. Rachel's parents were seated a few rows behind her, their faces pale and drawn, as if still unsure whether to believe the charges or believe their daughter's version of events. The prosecution opened with a clear message. This was not a crime of passion, not a tragic accident, and certainly not a case of mistaken identity. It was, they said, the calculated murder of a man trying to leave a toxic relationship. They laid out the evidence with precision, each photograph, text message, timestamp, and forensic report. The broken lamp was introduced as Exhibit A. The blood on Rachel's shoes was matched to Marcus. Her internet search history, including how to clean up after a violent act, was read aloud. The surveillance footage of her leaving and re-entering the apartment was shown frame by frame. Rachel showed little reaction during the presentation. She sat motionless, staring straight ahead. Her defense attorney attempted to redirect the jury's attention by suggesting the possibility of another intruder, someone who came in while Rachel was away, attacked Marcus, and left undetected. But that theory unraveled quickly under cross-examination. There was no sign of forced entry, no missing valuables, and no trace of any other person in the apartment. The defense then pivoted to Rachel's mental state. They painted her as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed and abandoned. They said she had acted out of desperation, not malice. They admitted she had sent angry messages but argued that didn't prove she had planned to kill Marcus. Her attorney described the relationship as volatile and codependent, saying the line between love and obsession had blurred. But the prosecution countered by returning to the facts. Rachel had purchased cleaning supplies in advance. She had deleted texts and searched for ways to cover up a crime. She had lied repeatedly to police. Nothing in her behavior after the murder showed confusion or remorse. It showed strategy and silence. Witnesses testified one after another. Marcus's friends spoke of how he had confided in them about wanting to leave Rachel. One recalled Marcus saying, "She's not going to let me walk away, not without a scene." Another said he'd warned Marcus to be careful. Neighbors from the apartment complex testified about the arguing they had heard the night of the murder. Yelling, then a heavy thud, and finally silence. The most damning testimony came from the forensic specialist who described the blood spatter found throughout the apartment. The expert explained how the droplets on Rachel's hoodie could only have occurred if she had been standing directly over Marcus at the time of the assault. That alone, he said, disproved her claim of simply finding him already injured. After 5 days of testimony, the case was handed to the jury. They deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned with the verdict, the room was silent. Rachel stood as the judge read the decision. Guilty of second-degree murder. There was no outburst, no reaction from her. She simply sat back down, her shoulders dropping slightly, as if the weight of months of denial had finally landed on her. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge addressed Rachel directly, noting that the murder was not only senseless, but cruel. Marcus had tried to leave peacefully. She had made sure he never got the chance. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 20. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Marcus's family. His mother said justice had been served, but nothing could bring her son back. She said she hoped others in controlling relationships would learn from what happened to him. That leaving is dangerous, but staying can be fatal. Rachel was taken from the courtroom in silence. There were no final statements, no apology, no visible emotion. She had believed she could control the story, manage the fallout, and maybe even walk away free. But in the end, the truth caught up to her. Detail by detail. One fact at a time. She wasn't going home. She was going exactly where she belonged. And the door behind her closed for good.